what's going on. Feel free to stay muted or camera off if you're not comfortable. With that, we are going to have these videos available for people who weren't able to make the meetings. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is going to be the intro to Tessellations. It's going to be a three-part series that's going to be hosted by the Vice President of ADROIT, Catherine O'Mary. She's going to be here for the next one. Couldn't make it this time. So, all right. So first off, with announcements, I'm going to give you all the updates on Paper for Water. So the biggest thing, well, we'll just roll through them. October 16th, that's in about 3 weeks, give or take. We've got our annual fundraiser, which is big event. It roughly commemorates the founding of Paper for Water, which is going to be now 10 years ago. So that's a big milestone for sure. It's going to be in person, but they'll have a virtual component as well, just in case. But big event, it's going to be here in Dallas. The funds raised at the fundraiser and for going to the fundraiser are obviously all going to go towards Paper for Water School. If you're not familiar with Paper for Water, it's a Dallas-based charity. And we got a bunch of volunteers and we all fold origami, especially kusudamas or ornaments, and trade them for donations that go to water wells around the world. So it's a really cool cause. Started 10 years ago by two girls who were only 5 and 8 at the time. And their little idea, just a little booth at Starbucks, has now raised more than $2.5 million. And they're still co-CEOs of the charity. It's about the coolest thing ever. So if you're not familiar, you should definitely check it out. And if you're free on October 16th, you should consider attending the fundraiser because it's going to be a great event. I'll be there. So that doesn't make you want to go. But yeah, that's a big one. Next up, their book is now available or soon available for pre-order. So definitely check that out. They've been working really hard on that. I haven't been super involved with this one myself, but I did make a cameo in there, I've been told. So definitely check out their book as well. That's also going to fundraise for them. Next up, this is a big one, North Texas Giving Day. So North Texas Giving Day is a big fundraiser across North Texas, and a bunch of charities are involved. They typically raise a ton of money. Paper for Water is participating again this year. William, who's also in the meeting, has also got a fundraiser page on there, as do I. William is crushing all of the rest of us with all the funds he's raising, is really kind of making us look bad. So, but that's no surprise. So definitely check that out. You can just look up North Texas Giving Day, Paper for Water, and all of our individual pages will be there. I've got a little fundraiser video that I'm gonna now subject y'all to because I can do that. So I'm gonna show you all that. Can you hear it? No, you probably can't.
Paper for Water's change
How about now?
I've been volunteering with Paper for Water for about 3 years now. Paper for Water is a Dallas-based nonprofit charity organization that raises money for water wells around the world by trading handmade origami rings for donation. Today, I'd like to tell you about another aspect of Paper for Water, the effect that volunteering has had on me. Working towards Well Done 2020 helped me grow in leadership and public speaking. Volunteering with the other change makers has helped me practice putting together events and fundraising. This year, I'm focusing on the Paper for Water Club at SMU. Even in the first few weeks of the semester, I'm already learning about what it takes to lead a club in a college environment. I hope you'll consider donating to Paper for Water this North Texas Giving Day. Your donation will not only help us bring water and the word to the thirsty around the world, but will also help change makers here in Dallas to become more capable and effective volunteers. Thank you.
So that's a little fundraiser video there. We've all got pages. North Texas Giving Day. Giving is open now. It will be open through Thursday. I did send out an email if you're on the mailing list. If you're not on the mailing list, feel free to message me your email in the chat and I'll add you. So that's got more info there, especially if you're interested in donating. If you're not able to donate, it's still really helpful to spread the word, just telling people who might be interested. So,
Hello, my name is Travis.
I figured out how to get in. There we go. Okay, that's I think all the updates we've got for Paper for Water. Other updates: the Pacific Coast Origami Convention, which was going to be going on in about a month, got canceled, which is very sad. So I was going to be there, but now I will not. So it's got canceled this year because of COVID. So that's a shame. Next up, the International Origami Internet Olympiad, excuse me, is typically an annual event. It's a big origami competition, arguably the biggest, at least the biggest accessible origami competition in the world. This one has been delayed several times. It was originally supposed to be in 2019, but I think the guy who was hosting it had some things going on in his personal life that caused him to push it back quite a bit. So currently it is scheduled to start October 1st. It is free to participate, so you should go and check it out. ioio.su will get you to their website. You can register there. It's a really cool thing. To be completely honest, would not be surprised at all if it gets pushed back again. So no guarantees there at all. But if it does happen, that would be pretty cool. It's a fantastic way to really amp up your skills and get a lot of practice in a short period of time. Typically, the way it works is that you've got a series of tasks that you're given, which is essentially getting an origami book for free, which is also nice. And now they do have a qualifying round. So you'll get 3 tasks and about a week to complete them. And so you'll have to fold 2 models. Maybe one of them will be from crease pattern. You'll submit those. And then people who make it through the qualifying round will move on to round 2, which takes a month to a month and a half to complete neighborhood of 14 or 15 tasks. Generally, about 11 of those are from diagram, 3 are from crease pattern, and 1 will be a designing challenge. So it's a lot of work to do in a short period of time, but it's definitely a good way to get better quick. It's also really nice because the models that they have are typically going to, they're going to be challenging for you if you're an intermediate folder, but even for complex folders, there's lots of room for shaping, stuff like that. So if you're new to origami, I'm not going to fool you. You don't want to compete. It's challenging. But if you're like, oh, I'm maybe intermediate, you could probably give it a shot. I mean, there's no downside. And if you don't complete all the tasks, then you don't complete all the tasks, right? There's no penalty. I think it's generally very well attended, meaning in the past they've had more than 500 people participating from something like 50 or 60 countries. So it is a big thing. Hopefully it will kick off soon, but that's definitely something to look into if you're interested at all. And don't be too intimidated. Now, moving on to the tessellation portion. Actually, I'll open it up to y'all before we get started, just in case anyone has got any announcements they'd like to share or questions about what I've said so far. Cool. As I'm going through this, if you get lost or confused or anything, feel free to just interrupt. It's all good. So on to tessellations. Typically so obviously there's a lot of branches in the origami world. There's lots of different areas to explore. And the most common, the most popular one is figurative models, meaning you're going to fold something that's going to look like a dog or a fish or a frog, right? The goal is to reproduce something that you can observe in your life. And a lot of times that's going to be an animal, but you can also do non-living things. just you're making something that looks like a something. Okay? Tessellations are more of an abstract, kind of strictly geometric form of origami. A tessellation in math is a pattern that can repeat in order to tessellate or completely cover a plane. Right? So it's just some pattern, it can be simple or complex, that repeats in a predictable way infinitely in 2 dimensions. So origami tessellations try to reproduce that with paper. So your finished result will not be something 3D. It's not going to look like an animal probably, but it's going to lie flat. It's going to have some pattern on it like this. So the one in the background is the one, roughly the one that we're going to be working on. On the left, we've got the crease pattern, which is the map of creases that are going to come together in order to fold this tessellation. Now, don't worry about the crease pattern. We're not getting anywhere near to that today. And on the right side, you can see digital representations of what this will look like, front and back, and then backlit. One of the really cool features of tessellations is that once it's collapsed, the paper is almost woven more than folded. Well, I mean, it is folded, but it gives this kind of weaving-esque patterns. And when you backlight it, the areas that have got more layers of paper are going to let less light through, whereas the regions that are just 1 or 3 layers thick, are going to be a little bit brighter. So backlit tessellations are really pretty. Going on, this is the one, here you can see a picture of this particular tessellation and one variation on it being backlit, which looks really cool. These are ones Catherine did herself. They're super tiny because she's crazy good at this. Hold on one sec. Trying to move the little bar of people. Yeah, so these are ones she's done. For this particular one, you can see how the backlit effect works on this, and it's really cool. So that's a brief introduction to the idea of tessellations. The goal of this series is going to be to equip you to become acquainted with tessellations in general and to learn how to go about approaching them, whether you want to fold them, whether you want to design them, whether you don't even know where to start. So today we're going to be focusing on gridding, which is an important component of tessellations that I'll explain here shortly. And then Catherine's going to come in. I'll tell you the meeting times for the next ones here shortly. And go into some more details in terms of pre-creasing them, collapsing them, and how she even goes about designing different types of twists and folds that she uses for these. So lots of stuff that should be really interesting. This is especially cool because since so much of the focus in the origami world is on more figurative designs, there's very little out there in terms of tessellations, especially video material. So this is going to be a little bit of something new. Just in general. So with that, we're going to go through, well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about gridding itself first. As I mentioned before, the tessellation is this pattern that repeats in order to cover a plane. And one of the easiest ways to go about this is to base your pattern on a grid. So if you, on this one, you can see that the repeating pattern is, depending on how you look at it, is kind of this, is that even, this hexagon here. And that hexagon is going to repeat and cover the plane. Okay, the hexagons are one of 3 regular polygons that tessellate without anything else going on. So you've got equilateral triangles, they'll tessellate and cover a plane. And you can just keep doing that forever. You've got squares, which will also do it. Notice that these are joined at the corners. You could also tessellate a plane like that, but it's just really obnoxious, so we don't do that. And then, of course, hexagons. Oh, wow, that was a pathetic hexagon. I'm sorry. Point being, they tessellate.
You can see the example better if you look on the hexagons.
Yeah, look over here. Because, yeah, thank you, William. Yeah, don't trust me drawing them. So anyways, these are the three that are going to tessellate. So the next thing that you can look at is which ones of these three have unbroken lines. In other words, which of these three patterns can you fit a line, in other words, a line that extends infinitely in both directions, onto? On the square one, you can, right? And you go like that. You can do them in 2 axes at 90 degrees. In the triangles, you can also do it. Do it there, there, and there. So those are 3 different axes at your kind of 60, 120 degrees. But with the hex, if you try and extend one of these lines, you're going to break it up. So you can make a grid out of squares and you can make a grid out of equilateral triangles, but you cannot make a grid out of hexagons. But you can kind of cheat it, because if you have your grid of triangles, you've got hexagons in there. So a lot of people will call this the triangle grid, they'll call it a hex grid or a hexagon grid, even though the hexagons are not in the individual units there. The actual math people name for it is an isometric grid, whereas the square one, you'd probably call it Cartesian. So in tessellations, the 2 most standard options for your grids are going, or for starting a design, are going to be your isometric grid or your just typical square grid. The isometric grid is a lot more common because it gives you a little bit more options in terms of things you can do, twists and intersections, different vertices. The square grid is a bit more restrictive and looks a little bit less natural. It's going to be harder to approximate these kind of circle hexagons going on here. So the isometric grid is definitely more popular, but you can use them. There are tessellations that don't lie on grids or do really weird things, but they're super complicated, and mostly the only people who mess with them have PhDs in math, so we're not going into that right now. From there, you're going to start with either a hex grid in this case, or you can also do it with a square grid, and you're going to have some pattern of creases that lies on there, which is going to also, no, my annotations are still there. Let me kill those real fast. All right. So going back to our crease pattern here, if you look at this, this lies on a hex grid. I can even show you the hex grid overlaid with it, but I don't think we really need to. You can see how there's a triangle here and here and here and all of these lines. Every point that is a vertex in the crease pattern is going to be a vertex in the isometric grid. That's not a rule for it to be a grid design model, but typically the majority of them will lie on grid points, or at a minimum, be able to be defined by grid points. So, going from there, if you're going to start folding a tessellation that is based on an isometric grid, the first step is going to be to fold to pre-crease that grid. So looking at these two folded ones here, you can see on the regions of paper that are not collapsed, there's a perfect little isometric grid on there of creases. This happens to be a very fine grid, a very dense one, but you can see the gridding there. And so the first step to folding most tessellations is going to be to pre-crease the grid. So that's what we're going to be talking about, how to do that today. I think most people who have experimented with the figurative design have come across the square grids for box pleating, and how to fold a square grid is a lot more intuitive because you're always going to be folding, at least when you're gridding, you're always going to be folding perpendicular to the sides of the square. With a hex grid, you're going to be folding a hexagon, and origami paper is typically a square. So our first step is going to be to actually get this into a hexagon shape. But before we actually start doing that, we do have some specific tips on gridding, on the process. So what type of paper should you be using? 3 criteria that are really important for origami in general, at least complex origami in general, but especially tessellations, is that you're going to want it to be thin. If you're doing a grid size where your triangles are closer to a centimeter rather than maybe millimeters, then you can get away with using a thicker paper. But thinner paper is typically going to be more desirable. You're going to be looking for paper, I don't know even what the word would be for it. But if you get like a tracing paper or a glassine paper, kite paper, papers like this, they're going to have a component in their actual makeup. They're going to be not strictly wood-based. A lot of them will have actually plastics or like a wax paper kind of thing. It's going to be a little bit more like that, but your paper is going to be almost, it's not going to feel like typical paper is the point. I don't really know how to describe this, but when you fold with it, it's going to be it's going to take creases very well. So when you make a crease, it's easy to make a strong crease that is going to have a really strong memory. So a lot of times that is really nice to have. So outside of being thin, you also want your paper to be strong. You don't want it to give in or tear while you're working on this or trying to do a twist. The next thing is that translucent is really nice. Now, a lot of us don't have just perfectly clear paper. If you have tracing paper, that works. It's not as good as glassine, but it does work. The reason for that is because the more light that it lets through, the more backlit it's going to be. Obviously, you don't want something that's completely clear because then you wouldn't have any distinction between the regions of 1 layer versus 3 versus 5. But when you can get ones that have at least some level of transparency, you don't want to have like a tissue foil or something that's not going to let any light through. You lose a whole dimension of the tessellation. Next thing, when you get into gridding, especially if you're working on a more intricate one or a denser, more complex one, you do want to keep your hands dry. Like, you don't think about it, but your hands have got oils on them, right? Even if you ate something an hour ago, there's still some residual oils on there. They're natural oils on your hand. So you do want to try and wash your hands beforehand, keep your hands dry and clean. That does help. And even if you can't see the difference, like, you're not leaving grease marks on the paper, but it will make the paper weaker and a little bit more flexible. It's not going to hold the folds quite as well. So it does make a difference. A lot of times I'll even have just a little bit of hand sanitizer with me wherever I'm, whatever, at my desk that I'm folding, so that I can do that and make sure that I'm not going to be messing up the paper. So that's another thing. Folding surface, you want to be, and this goes for all origami, you want to have a nice smooth flat surface that's rigid, right? You don't want to be folding on a blanket or carpeting or something like that. You need to have something that can really support you when you're making a crease, because precision is super important for tessellations, especially again when you're doing more intricate. So sharp creases, precise creases, really, really important. You want to pay extra attention as you're making these creases. If you've got a folding tool, use it. If you don't, you can even use a spoon or one of those little things that come in the handle of a milk carton. Those work as well. If not, the back of your fingernails will work fine. You just have to really make sure your creases are good and sharp. The next thing is that when you are pre-creasing, you're going to want to go back over your creases. So once you've made a mountain fold, you're going to want to go back and reverse that and valley fold right through it, so that it's not going to be a mountain crease or a valley crease. It will just be a neutral crease. It's going to effectively be a hinge. The reason that that's really nice is, one, when you do go to collapsing your model or the tessellation, you don't have to worry about along the way being like, okay, this one's a mountain, that one's a valley, right? And it's going to make it easier to work with. But if you've got all of these folds lining up that are mountain or valley, your paper is going to start to warp. It's going to become more difficult to be precise. So do strive for neutral creases. When we get to the actual folding component, I'll go through that and give you all plenty of reminders. Next thing, reference points. So when you are working on a tessellation, you're going to be working based off of a grid, and everything is going to be defined from the grid. So for example, here's a point. This is an incomplete grid, right? But we've got a point here where these intersect. That would be your reference for some crease in the tessellation. Trust your reference points, right? Even like if your grid is a little bit off or skewed or something, then the edges are probably not going to be lining up like you want. Even if it's really imprecise, or I mean really minute, you're going to see that when you're making these creases. So when you get into pre-creasing the model and even working on the grid, you want to watch and make sure that you're sticking to your reference points and trust that more than the actual edge of the square, right? If I'm going to be, so if I want, here's how I'll explain this for sure. If I wanted to fold this, let me get my little annotator thing. If I wanted to fold this crease here, you could say, okay, I'm going to fold this edge up to this edge because that crease is going to be halfway in between. But it's going to be a more precise crease if instead you say, okay, I want the crease that goes through this point, and this point, and this point, and that point. Okay? Trust your reference points. Next thing is that this picture here is what not to do. It's got the right type of paper. It's got strong, precise creases, right? But it's not, you see how the low, oh, we've got something. Okay. I haven't personally messed with, we got something in the chat. I haven't personally messed with Skytone. Elephant hide is really nice paper, but it's definitely a thick one. I think some of them will reach to the neighborhood of 100 grams per square meter. But people do use it for tessellations, especially if you're working with a bigger grid size. And if it's thinner, then you may be able to work with that. So, but yeah, you're definitely not going to want to have a grid size where your individual units are only millimeters. Anyways, on this, you can see how over here we've gridded down to effectively eighths, whereas in this axis we've only gridded in half, counting as this is one, right? And this we've only done here, right? So the ideal way to go about this is going to be more like, oh, can you still see my screen? Are we good there? It said I pressed a button or something. I think we're okay.
I think so.
Yeah,
So
the screen is still visible.
So if the ideal way to go about this would not be to make these 8 creases, 7 creases over here, it would be, okay, first we're going to do fourths, right? And not just do that in one axis, but do it in all 3. Okay, like this. So now, instead of working on a half grid and doing all the way down to your 1/8 or your 16ths, now you're going to work with a 4ths grid, and then you're just going to divide in half. Okay, so you're going to keep dividing in half, but you're going to do it uniform across the whole thing. You want this kind of even gridding. Obviously, my little annotation here drawing is your creases should be a lot more precise than that. But it's important to do it like that. And the biggest reason for that, and this goes for square grids as well, is that when you are making a crease, right, you fold and then you unfold. And in that, just a little bit of paper, right, you break the fibers, and so now you've got a hinge there. But that absorbs just a little bit of paper. If you look at a fold, or if you look at a crease under a microscope, you can see there's a little lump there because it absorbs some paper. Sounds like something we shouldn't even be worried about, but when you're working on a 64 grid, that's going to compile pretty quickly. And so when you go to grid again in a different axis, your paper is no longer going to be square. And so being precise is going to be difficult, if not impossible. The other big benefit of even gridding is that you've got extra reference points based on this. Whereas if I'm doing fourths here, I don't really have anything to guarantee that this line is precise, right? Except that it's between these two. Whereas if I would have had this and this, then, oh my gosh, they look terrible. I'm sorry. Anyways, with even gridding, you've got more reference points. It's easier to be more precise, not only because it's soaking up paper that way, but also because of the reference points make it a lot easier. So I think that's all we've got in terms of me just talking. So we're going to get to the actual tutorial portion of this. The first thing that you're going to need to do is to figure out what grid density you want to work with. So, and this comes down to analyzing your own skill level, right? Or the level of complexity at which you feel comfortable. If you are an experienced folder who's worked with origami before, or who has experience with tessellations, then yeah, go for a bigger grid size or a more dense grid size, or work with a small sheet of paper. Go ahead and push that boundary. If you've never done tessellations before, or you're kind of new to origami in general, you're going to want to do a smaller grid size. And that also comes down to paper choice. If you're working with a 12-inch sheet of paper and you say, okay, I'm going to do a 16th grid, or even a 30-seconds grid, you'll probably be fine. If you try and do a 30-seconds grid on a 6-inch paper, well, that's going to be a lot more complex, because that's going to effectively be the equivalent of doing a 64 grid on a 12-inch sheet of paper. So yeah, you have to keep that in mind, is the point. I'm not going to really tell you what grid size you want to do. The only recommendation I would give, I'm not planning to go over reference points for grids that are difficult to calculate. In other words, grids that are not powers of 2. So good grid sizes to choose from is going to be a 2, a 4, and probably an 8. This is essentially like you're not going to really be able to do much of anything with that. 8, you would get like maybe a portion of one of the pieces that tessellates. I would say probably if you're really new, you start with an 8 grid. But typically I'd say minimum is going to be about a 16 grid, even regardless of your paper size. You'll be fine with a 16 grid with 6-inch paper. I wouldn't go smaller than that. If you have 12-inch paper or bigger, that's great. Bigger is going to make it easier to a point. If you've got like a 6-foot sheet of paper, then yeah, you're going to put yourself through some pain. But up to probably 18 inches, you're going to be fine. In terms of paper type, I talked about this a little bit before. If you've got glassine paper, use it. Glassine is fantastic for tessellations. Tracing paper is all right. It's not the best for reversing creases back and forth, but it's really nice for being transparent. So backlit, it looks really good. And it does take a really strong crease. So tracing paper will work. Kite paper is essentially a variation of glassine. If you've got any of that, that's good. Kami will work just fine. I have a reasonable degree of confidence that most of y'all will have access to Kami, which is just standard craft store origami paper. That works fine for this, and there's a lot you can do with Kami for tessellations. I had something else I wanted to say. Yeah, pick a paper size. Your kind of grid density will depend on that. And but regardless of how dense of a grid you're going to do, the first step is going to be the same, which is that we've got to make a hexagon. After that, you need to pick your type and size sheet of paper. Then we're going to make it into a hexagon, and then we're going to work on a grid from there. A 16, a 32, a 64, 128 is probably ambitious, but you should totally do it because that'd be cool. One of the nice things about doing this in a kind of 3-part segment is that you will have time from this meeting to the next in order to increase your grid. So as long as you learn what you're doing in terms of gridding today, then you'll have 6 days in order to complete that grid before the next class. With no further ado, hopefully, yeah. All right. So I don't have the most ideal situation here in terms of filming my own paper. I'm going to go ahead and join the Zoom meeting on my phone, and then I'm going to bounce my phone so that you can kind of see what I'm doing, and I'll have both of them visible to y'all so that if you do want to see me folding, you can go to that. I've got these kind of quasi diagram things set up here, which I think should be enough to go off of. But I am going to go ahead and connect on my phone real quick. In the meantime, if you've got any questions, just go ahead and yell at me. All right, I'm going to pin the other Travis So I gotta make sure the mics don't interfere because they love to play that game. Now you've got two of me. But if you are interested in seeing physical folding occurring, you can see that over here. You should be able to do a split screen even between speaker view and screen share. If not, or you don't even want to mess with it, like I say, the video itself should be enough. I'm going to get a color you can see a little bit better. Sorry for the delay here, by the way, y'all. But should be good to go now. Okay, and I don't even have a bigger sheet of paper, so that's perfect. Okay. So for this, on the screen itself, we've got our first two steps, which is that we're going to take the paper and we're going to fold it in half. Color side or white side up, it doesn't matter. A lot of the papers that you might be working with, glassines, all of that, are going to be the same color on both sides, so it doesn't make a difference. But since we are going to be making the creases neutral, it doesn't make a difference. So start here. Your standard kind of technique, strategy is going to apply. Which is that you want to make sure, especially in these first steps, to line up your corners and your edges really well before sharpening that crease. Now that I've got them lined up with a soft crease, and go back over with a fingernail, make it nice and sharp. Now, when I mentioned about neutralizing creases, that's going to be more important for the actual grid, but I'll show you how that works. And take this, we folded it, a valley fold with the white side up. Now we'll do a valley fold with the red side up along that same crease. This time you don't have to worry about the reference point as much. We're just reversing that crease. And so now that's just a hinge, right? The paper is just kind of going to bend there. So that's what you want for this. Another nice aspect of that, which you may notice on your own sheet, is that mountain folds are mountain creases are typically more visible in a pre-creased model, because when you fold it in half, right, the paper has to bend like this. When you unfold it, you're left with that little lump there. Okay? And so the mountain fold side has got the lump. If you reverse the crease and you essentially mountain crease on both sides, then you're kind of going to get half and half, but either side is going to be equally visible, which is nice. From here, we're going to have pinch folds, the top and bottom. We take this edge and fold it to the center. We're not going to fold all the way across. We're only going to fold maybe half the length of the paper, probably not even that. You bring this up to that center crease. If it makes it easier for you, you can even go ahead and fold that so that you're bringing this edge to an edge rather than a crease. That's a nice little trick. It's easier to be precise that way. You get it lined up. Crease, and that's probably even overkill. Get that crease there. We'll flip it over. We're going to do the same thing over here. And unfold, you can see got crease, crease, and crease. Yeah. These pinch folds that we did, we call it a pinch fold because it doesn't go all the way across the square. We don't need to make those neutral since they're not actually going to be an element of the grid itself. Now, we're going to bring, so again, if you want to, you can fold it in half, but we're going to make a crease that goes through the middle line here, and it brings this point to this crease. I showed the creases as well as what that looks like on one corner here on the screen, so you can see what that's going to look like. We can do the same trick we did last time. Also, it's going to help if you have it be the mountain fold, that is the crease you're bringing it to, because they are easier to see. The way to do that is to start a crease that goes through this endpoint, even though it doesn't meet here, and then you can kind of roll it up, right? I didn't actually crease that, but I'm just, as long as I move this, it's going to be going through that. So I can line it up with the center line there. And now that I've got it roughly where I want, I can kind of fine tune that, make a soft crease, make sure everything lines up and lies flat. If your crease changes direction along the way, it's not going to lie flat and it's just going to cause problems. So you don't want that either. Once you get it there with soft creases, again, reinforce it with the stronger ones. This is also not going to be part of the grid since we're actually going to remove this full triangle, so you don't need to worry about making that crease neutral. And then we're going to do the same thing 3 more times to outline the edge of our hexagon. Just as a side note, this is a cool way to construct a 60 degree angle just through folding. All right, if you think about that right off the bat, it's not like getting a 45 degree or a 22.5 degree where you just bring an edge to an edge. But this angle right here, at least theoretically, is perfectly 60 degrees. That's kind of cool. There's a number of ways to achieve that reference, but this is a really elegant one. So flip it over. We'll do the same thing. That's one of the areas in origami that math can kind of creep in on you. But typically, unless you are trying to find those references yourself, or you're working on designing a model that needs those references, you don't need to worry about the math. You just need to fold it. So. Now we've got this shape here. And this is technically, it's a hexagon, but it's not a regular hexagon yet. We've got a little bit too long over here. So we're going to have a portion here and here that are going to need to come off. The way we do that is first by finding the center, the midpoint of our hexagon. So that's the right side of the screen. That's the next step here. The way that I like to do this is to unfold two of these that are opposite of each other. So you've got it like this, and then you can bring this edge so that it lies on that edge. The reason I unfold these is so they don't get in the way. If you like to, you can flip it over and do that. It doesn't make really a difference, but you're just going to be bringing this edge up to that one, like that. Make sure that edges line up so that this line is perfectly on top of that line. This point is going to overhang on that side, and that point is going to overhang this side. That's fine. It's supposed to, but you want to make sure that the edges are on top of each other. Once you get it lined up, soft crease, double check, and then go for it. This is going to be part of the grid. So once we've got that creased, we'll go ahead, flip it over, do it the other way. Back to this stage. Now, in order to get the other one, we're going to fold these back in and unfold these and just repeat that same step. Now you know that your crease is going to go through this point, the intersection of these two creases, which can also help with lining it up. Got that? We'll go ahead and reverse it. Now you can undo these corner flaps. We don't need them folded in. Next step, 2 more creases. We're going to make a crease that goes through this point and this point. It's going to be parallel to this edge. We're going to do one at the top and bottom. And what that's going to do is that's going to define the final 2 edges of our regular hexagon. It's going to be right here. These ones, again, you want to be really careful with because they're going to serve as references that define the entire rest of our gridding system. So if you've got some error here, that's going to be compounded by quite a bit, especially if you're doing a more detailed grid. Yeah. Once you have done that, now on the right side, you can see how this hexagon is defined. Each of those holes is going to become a cut. Gasp, chalk, or you can cut when you're getting your square ready or your hexagon ready. It's pretty chill. So you can take a pair of scissors and try to cut along creases. I don't recommend this. It sounds like it would be the cleaner, easier option, but really it's not, because you've made these creases that effectively perfectly define this hexagon, but then you're going to be introducing another aspect of error because scissors aren't naturally going to follow creases. They just cut paper. And so it's going to be down to your skill of cutting whether or not it matches up with the crease or not. What I like to do is to actually tear it along these lines. The best way to go about that is to crease the snot out of them, to just crease it and then turn it around, reverse it, and crease it a lot of times much more aggressively than you would to pre-crease a model, because we want to absolutely destroy those fibers so that when we try and tear the paper, that's going to be the weakest point and it will naturally tear along there. I'm going to start with these two and then I'll do the triangles. I'll show you what that looks like. I'm going to even use this kind of really getting at that, whereas normally if I'm creasing this, I'm going to use kind of the face of the nail, maybe the edge coming at it like this, but now I'm going to be coming at it like this, gives you kind of the front of your nail. It's just a little bit rougher on the paper. Reverse it, the same thing. You'll notice that that's already a really strong crease, but we want to get it strong enough that it becomes weak. So go at it a couple times. You can even get that edge wet if you want to. You can do that with a moist sponge or just by running it along your tongue if you're not opposed to doing that. But either way, the end of it would be really embarrassing if I screw this up on video. It's always a little bit of a like, but just like that, you get it. Now, come over here, you'll do the same thing. You're gonna have to do it 6 times. Obviously, it went off the crease over here, but I don't care about that. This part is coming off, so. One thing that can make it easier when you're tearing is instead of just trying to pull it apart, what I like to do is to, if this is the thing that I want to tear, I can take the paper like this and bring this and that closer together so that this rises up off the ground, right? And then I'll only be pulling apart along the surface of the table, right, which makes it less likely that anything's going to go wrong. That's a little bit weird to visualize, but it can help. So this is another option, but there's no one right way to do this as long as you get your hexagon right. There's plenty of wrong ways to do it, but this is what I was talking about as far as ripping it. Got this side and this side on the surface. This whole region is lifting up because I brought these closer together, and that gives me a really natural place to start that tear. That side is done, now for the other one. And don't feel like there's any reason to rush this because we've spent this long getting set up for it. You can, saving a couple seconds isn't worth messing up your whole hexagon now, because happens to all of us and it's frustrating. So you have to start over, and now your paper that you were so excited about using is going in the scrap bin for pulp, and it's no good. So take your take your tearing slowly is a good call. Obviously, it's preferable to have it be in as close as you can to one continuous motion, right? To just go zzz. But if you need to stop along the way, that's just fine. It's not a huge risk, but there's always a chance that stopping and restarting is going to give a chance for that tear to get off track. But mostly just focus on taking it slowly. If you have to readjust, doesn't make a big difference usually. And actually looking at the way I do it, I like to readjust because it allows you readjust. It allows you to make sure, right? If I'm pulling from here and the tear by now is over here, the distance between your hands and the crease, the bigger that gets, the more likely it is to go off course because you're pulling away on either side. So the crease can just wander or the tear can just wander. So it is good to readjust to make sure your hands are close to that crease, make sure that you're applying that tear in a precise way. With that, we've got hexagons, which,
Excuse
yeah.
me, Travis.
Mhm.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the benefit of tearing rather than cutting with an X-Acto knife?
So cutting with an X-Acto knife is not a bad option, certainly better than using scissors. But the difficulty with an X-Acto knife is, so it depends on how you use it. If you're cutting with an X-Acto knife on a cutting board using a ruler, then you're going to have a nice, very clean cut. And it's going to be a very straight line, but it's not, the X-Acto knife is not going to have a tendency to follow the crease, right? So, whereas the tear does, because it almost has to follow the crease. So with an X-Acto knife, if you're doing it, that's the same thing as drawing a hexagon and trying to cut it. Like, will you get pretty close to a hexagon? Yeah. But if you do it by tearing along the crease, it kind of has to follow that. It's probably a little bit, doing it with an X-Acto knife in general is going to be lower risk of having the cut go where you don't want it to go, but a higher risk of having a slightly imprecise hexagon. That's how I would sum that up.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Are there any other questions before we move on to the actual written?
Just one comment. I was actually trying to go for the corners first because they were bigger pieces of paper to hold on to and easier to tear. But then as I hit the very thin edge and I didn't have corners to hold on to, I realized I made a mistake.
Right. So that is typically why I start with that edge. But you, I've done it both ways. It's just trickier to get that one started. When you do have just this region to tear off. So I would just make sure that you get that crease as strong as you can and just be real careful when you're starting. Once you get started, it'll be the same as anything else. But just getting over that one bit, because it's a thin bit and it's on a slope. But yeah, that is one of the kind of that can come up. Did you manage to sort it out and get the hexagon?
I mean, there's a little bit of damage in one of the corners, but I'm gonna sail ahead as is.
Yeah.
It should be fine.
Yeah, no, it should be fine. A lot of times there is just a little bit of an imperfection there, but as long as you've got enough of an edge to get your references, you'll be fine. Okay, so now we're at the point where we need to decide on the grid density or the level of grid that we're going to be doing. So you have to, I guess this is a 10-inch. Yeah. I think it was a 10-inch square. Maybe, I don't even know. Yeah, 10 inches. So from there, you can decide, okay, I can do a 16 grid. You can even calculate, if you feel like it, the size of each triangle that's going to come out in your grid, right? If you're working with a 6-inch, which is 15 centimeters, and you're doing the 16 grid, well, then each one's going to be about a centimeter, right? So that's a pretty good estimate. 1 centimeter is pretty easy to work with. It usually gives you plenty of room to see what you're doing. So again, if you're not super comfortable with this, then that's probably a fine place to start. I wouldn't go lower than a 16 grid unless you're very new to origami, because you're not really gonna, like, you can still do everything we're gonna do, but it's gonna end up being like half of one part of one of the units, and it's not gonna look very good. With a 16 grid, at least you should be able to see what's going on, and with a 32 grid, you'll have a nice tessellation, and then if you want to do a 64 grid, then you'll get something really intricate. So it just depends on what you're up for. 1 centimeter per unit is pretty good, pretty easy. If you want to go half centimeter, you're a little bit more intricate, say maybe higher intermediate, maybe low medium complexity. If you get to like a 1/4 centimeter, now you're getting really intricate. And then if you're Catherine, then you just keep going and leave us all in the dust. So go ahead and pick what you're going to do. I'll probably do, I don't know if this is the actual one that I'm going to use for the next classes, because I'm not going to be teaching you all those if everything works out. So the other thing is, now y'all know how to grid. You can take another sheet of paper in between this and the next class and get a grid set up with really nice paper and pick your grid size and do all of that, which I'll probably end up doing. But for the purpose of this, I'll start with a 16 grid. If we've still got time, then I'll just keep going. That's another benefit, is you can always increase your grid size by a factor of 2. That's pretty easy to do.
So if you want, I've got like an example of the 16 and a
Oh,
32
there you
grid
go. Yeah.
real quick. So like these aren't great models at all whatsoever, but I do have them backlit. This is what you're probably gonna wind up with 16 grid
Right.
versus, actually, I think this is double those numbers actually. So this is gonna be your 64 grid. I think if I count, nope, this is 32 and this is 16.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some design in there. It'll pop, relatively well, but it ain't gonna be as like, oh look, there's some really neat designs in there with 32.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good demonstration. I didn't have any of them to show, but that gives you a good idea of what to expect based on what grid size you're going to pick. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to go back to this. We don't really need to have this up, but well, I guess actually I will go ahead and stop the share and I'll go just to my screen where you can see what I'm folding. Okay, so we're right here. I'm going to start with a 16 grid. I'll probably go to a 32. So in order to do that, we start here. All of these folds should be neutral. So if you like folding an edge to edge, you can do it like this. That's going to become, well, we'll do that for now. So I'll just take this edge, hold it up to there. Right, line up your edge. Make a good strong crease and reverse it. Do that on the opposite side. Now, instead of going straight to fourths, I'm going to switch this to a different axis and do the same thing. So we're going to be making that fold 6 times total, but you'll rotate it around and then we'll do the same thing. That way you have that even gridding that we talked about. And one more to go. And now we're at the point where we've got a reference point. So instead of focusing on bringing this edge to that edge, we're going to focus on going through this. There you can see it. This intersection and that intersection. Those are the more important references here because regardless of whether or not your edges line up perfectly, if your intersections of creases go to where they've got a space in the middle, well, you can't collapse that. So You really want to focus on the individual vertices over the edge line. Okay. So now we're here. The next round is going to be making your creases here, 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 here. While you could say, okay, I'm going to bring this edge to that edge. Okay, well, that's going to work. But remember, we talked about the crease thickness absorption compiling dilemma. So it's going to be better to bring this edge, you pinch this into a mountain fold and bring this edge to that edge like that. That way, every time you do that, you're just folding the creases on either side of the new fold you're making. So there's no room for error to compile on the individual ones, which is really nice. And it's also easier to be precise, even within that. Yeah. So. Each stage of gridding is going to take roughly twice as long as the last one did, because the first time around we were only doing this. But now we've got to do this and that 6 times, and then reverse the creases. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you're working to a 96 grid and you get to a 48, no, you're not halfway done, you know, or the last stage wasn't, you know what I mean. And from there, the process kind of looks the same for each one, because you're just going to be bringing edge to edge each and every time. We're at the stage now where we can be folding based off of reference points. So do focus on those.
Travis, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have just finished a 32 grid on this 4-inch, I believe.
All right, and you're fast. When did you start that? Did you start while we were making the hexagon?
No, I started when you started folding the grid part of it.
All right. That's impressive. That's a very speedy grid in there. You did a 32 grid from what size paper?
This is 4-inch glassine.
All right, once again, ladies and gentlemen, William putting us all to shame. Yeah, that looks great. Now hold that up a little bit closer to the camera. You can see the grid lines there, y'all. Look at that. So not only did he do it in record time, it looks like a precise grid as well. So that's pretty cool.
For a point of comparison, William, it might have taken me about an hour and a half to make a 32-inch grid on 6-inch 2 nights ago. So you are rocking it for sure.
Yeah, no, William's killing it once again. That's awesome. Nice job. Nice job. Yeah. Okay, so but yes, gridding does not have to take forever. And from there again, you just keep going. Yeah, William, have you? I don't remember it. Have you looked into any in terms of origami design?
Not really.
Okay. I'll have to find a time to meet with you and get you started on that because you're absolutely killing it at the folding, and I'd love to see you pick up some of the designing stuff as well.
Hey, William, I'm actually kind of curious if you'd have any tips for how to improve on your speed without necessarily sacrificing quality, because I feel like one of the slowest parts for me during this is lining up all of my reference points and making sure my Q's and P's are minded and all of that. But I'm be curious to know if there's like speedy ways to check things quickly.
It's a lot of practice, really. So it's a lot of practice, and it's mainly just I've done this quite often. I've made lots of quite dense grids, and it's mainly just aligning the edges to each other and making sure your creases are sharp so you can easily see them.
Yeah.
I'll say that the double creasing or the reverse creasing is helping out a lot with that before. It's not something I've done previously, and now that I'm doing it, I can definitely say, oh wow, that's where that is, without having to guess as much.
Yeah. No, you think like, oh, that's gonna take me so much more time, but like in the end, when you're trying to find your little faint valley folds on step whatever, you know, a lot of times it is ultimately going to be faster, and it's going to come out better with the yeah, exactly.
I also add extra light when I'm doing folding. I happen to have a natural spectrum daylight light that I use, and seeing everything really clearly speeds the whole thing up, and also the accuracy.
That's true. Good lighting, so helpful. I'm not at home right now. I'm at library, so my setup is not my standard one, but when I'm folding a model for real, I've got 3 or 4 big lights there just to make sure it's really well lit, because it helps out so much.
Yeah, it almost looks like you're folding into shadow, Travis.
Yeah, part of the reason for that, I've got a light here, but I've found that it makes it harder to see on camera.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so when I'm doing these meetings, I usually fold in a darker space that I'm comfortable with. I guess this one it's not too bad. It doesn't make much of a difference here, so I guess I will have it on. But normally when I'm doing the meetings, I'll turn on the light and everyone's like, go back to the dark. We've got a glare now. So yeah, but when I'm here, I can't do that quite as much. So, but yeah, that's a good catch. But one other thing that's worth keeping in mind, especially with higher grid sizes, when you are going through and dividing everything in half, it can be really tempting to pleat the entire thing just accordion style and get all of those creases knocked out. But when you do that, there's a little bit of paper slides around and you've got a little bit of that inaccuracy that arises just from the aspect of your paper piling up, right? So as tempting as that is, a lot of times it's better to do whatever maximum of 2 or 3 and then just undoing it. And so you don't get those all stacking up, because that will make it less precise in the end. Different people actually will count grid size in different ways, which is kind of interesting. I would call this a 16 grid because from here to here, it's divided into 16ths. Some people, I think, would call it an 8 grid because this edge is divided into 8ths. It comes to, like, if you think about a square, then saying here to here and here to here are going to be the same thing. Whereas in a hexagon, it's not. I do prefer saying that this is a 16 grid rather than an 8th grid, because this, to me, in terms of the size of these to the size of the final thing, is roughly comparable to a 16 grid on a square, versus saying that this would be an 8th grid, in which case on a square, they would be much bigger. So that's just my preference there. You will probably see it both ways in the origami world, and in the end, it doesn't really make a difference as long as you're consistent. If you're writing about it or you're trying to discuss it in any professional way, but just something to keep in mind.
Well, I guess if you're going to consider one row of units, if you only count the line on top, you'd get 8, but
Right.
actually that row has another, section of units down below, so that kind of makes it 16.
Exactly. It like both ways do make sense. There's valid reasons to go either way. So in the end, like, is there a right answer? Not really. So yeah, just as long as you try to, as long as you're not intentionally being confusing about it, like, I think you'll be fine. Okay, so I'm just rounding out here on my 16 grid. We've got about 20 minutes left, and we've got a few options. We can either just kind of keep doing this. I'm probably going to go up to at least a 32. So I could do that just now, but I can also do that in the interim before the next class. We can hang around and just chat. I don't know if any of you all have any models that you recently completed or you want to show off, or if you've got any questions or about something from this, or you're working on a model and you're kind of stuck, or you've just got a general origami question, or you want to talk about design or whatever, or you just want to chat. So what do y'all think? You've got me for at least 20 minutes, so.
I have a question about the folds we've been putting in. These are not neutral folds, right?
Oh, they should be. Yeah.
It should be neutral.
Yes.
Everything. Okay. I didn't quite clarify that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. No, and if they're not, it's not the end of the world. But I mean, obviously. This is what I was talking about for the neutral folds, because when we do get around to pre-creasing the tessellation itself and collapsing it, it's going to be really nice to be able to have each of these to be able to hinge both ways and to be visible from either side. So yeah, this is where we want the neutral folds. But
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, of course.
Travis, I think I have to go.
All right. Thanks so much for coming, and
Sure.
yeah, we'll see you soon. What about y'all? Was there anything else you had questions about or wanted to discuss?
Just off the top of my head, I've been going through the God, I'm going to mispronounce his last name, I promise. Eric Jerd.
Oh yeah. I've heard Jardy. I've heard Jerd. I think Jardy is right, but I'm not completely sure on that. It's got like a G and a D and a J for those of y'all who haven't seen it before, so it is a little confusing.
I'm gonna look it up one of these days, but I've been going through the book Origami Tessellations, which has been super, super cool. This is the first time that I've folded a grid pattern on an actual hexagon shape, which
Okay.
I don't know which I prefer, but I was kind of curious to know, like, I can imagine that in some cases you're definitely going to want a hexagon shape in order for certain models to collapse correctly. And that if you were going to do them on just a regular square piece of paper that you left with a bunch of triangle grids, that you're going to wind up either with weird edges, which is fine, or just the model won't collapse the way you're expecting it to. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah. So in terms of the model collapsing, because this is a tessellation, by definition, it has to tessellate, right? So you can always extend it. So even if the crease pattern you're working with is on a hexagon, well, you can always just repeat that pattern until you reach the edges. So if you were working on a hex pleated model, which is a version of box pleating set on an isometric grid that was on a hexagon, then yeah, you would probably run into some trouble. But in terms of tessellations, typically, except for maybe some weird cases that are more like fractals or self-similar geometries than actual tessellations, you should be able to just extend it and you won't have trouble with collapsing. Two of the main, probably the biggest reasons for working from a hexagon itself is one, like you were saying, the weird edges. The symmetry you get since you're working in a hexagonal or isometric system, having the paper mirror that system, it just comes out looking nicer. Whereas if you've got the 90-degree and the 60-degree symmetries kind of fighting, you're going to have weird references and the edges are going to look kind of wonky. The other thing is just that the process of making the creases itself is easier because you don't have to worry about those little triangles that go out towards the edge, and you're actually aligning the edges instead of only the creases that are defining your hexagon. So yeah, I do, if I'm working for a tessellation, I do prefer to go ahead and make it a hexagon sheet. But you can do it either way, for sure.
Between now and the next session, should we be practicing this and having some grids ready to go?
That's a good question. So real quick, I am going to go back to the PowerPoint because you reminded me I forgot to show you all the last slide, which is when the dates for the next ones will be. So it looks like this. Our next meeting will be next week, Tuesday, from 6 to 6:45. That's a shorter one. And then the one after, that's wrong. That's a Wednesday, my bad. So a week from today, and then the one after that will be Tuesday, October 12th from 5 to 7. For that one, you're actually going to need a toothpick for getting in some of the nooks and crannies. Between now and the next meeting, all that you should need going into it is one grid of whatever density you want to work with ready to go. If you would like to have multiple, there's certainly not going to be a downside to that. I think next meeting, Catherine's going to be going over some of the aspects of twist folds. Within the next 2 meetings, I'm not necessarily sure how she'll split up, but we're going to be talking about twists, some of her process of designing. We'll be going over how to pre-crease this specific tessellation and then later how to collapse it. So ultimately, the only thing that you're really going to need is one pre-creased grid. But if you've got multiple, like there's no downside to that, and practice is always good. So
Yeah, I'm looking at a calendar. The 27th is actually a Monday. So you mean the 29th?
yes, I mean the 29th. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for catching that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I did. Wow. Yeah, I'm in the 29th.
Okay, thanks. And
Yeah.
these are all central time because I'm in California.
Yeah,
Okay,
these are Central Time. Yeah.
okay, we're 2 hours after y'all.
Okay, that's right. That's right. So yeah, that is the plan for the next ones. I will send out an email to the ADROIT mailing list, just recapping that. So we make sure, and we'll have a Zoom link for those ones as well. But it should be, those are the times we're planning on right now, as long as nothing comes up. So. And again, if you're not on that mailing list, or you would like to be, definitely feel free to shoot me your email and I can add you. But otherwise, we will have the information posted on our Facebook and our website, and Origami USA's calendar events, and the Origami mailing list, and the Origami Dan Discord server, and my Instagram, and just about everywhere I can put it. So it should be available either way.
Real quick, that was the 29th and the 12th.
Yes.
Hi.
Mm.
So I want to ask if the next 2 lessons will be available for videos afterwards.
Yes, I'm recording this whole series, and I've recorded a lot of the meetings, but these ones at least will be available for the public on our website. So you will be able to access these afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because for the time difference, I may not be able to join the October one.
Okay, I understand.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for asking. Oh, I have it here. I can show you all something. So I think since now in the last meeting, I've been messing a little bit with using a laser cutter for origami crease patterns. Oh man, I don't have one of them here, do I? So I've just been experimenting with kind of perforating the paper, so you can actually go ahead and use a laser cutter to do the pre-creasing for you. I'm messing around with that a little bit, because I know Robert Lang has done some work on that, but it's pretty interesting. It works so far, better than I would have even expected. So something to kind of watch out for. I thought I had a piece here that I could show you, but I don't. But if you have access to a laser cutter, or you're interested in messing with that, shoot me an email, because I've figured out the kind of settings on the laser cutter and what you need to do to the file in order to make that work. I'll probably try and do a little write-up on that I can post as well.
I actually took 10 seconds to look up to see exactly how you were folding all of those edges. And I realize now that the pleating thing that you're doing is way faster than the individual folds that I was doing before. And I'm going to want to take this recording and watch it like twice at least to try to absorb all these little tips and tricks.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things you pick up on. That was one of the things I was talking about earlier, because I just looked down and I realized that, like, ideally you wouldn't want to pleat this much. I'd probably broken that into two, just because the edge does creep a little bit. But in general, doing the pleats like that and bringing, because once you get away from the raw edge and you're working with folded edges, your margin for error is less, or you're less likely to make an error. So you can really go from edge to edge, and it's so much faster. It really is. That's one of the things that William kind of mentioned, but that definitely will help you on the speed for sure. One thing that's kind of funny, this one isn't as big of a one, but if you're sitting at a table or a desk when you're doing it, you know how sometimes when you're going, you have to kind of pick up the edge or draw it. If you bring your whole thing over to the edge, right, so it drops off the side of the table, then you can just pick it right up like that and you get your crease. And so when you're doing that a million times, that also will save you time.
I want to say I've definitely done that before in like other situations where I'm like, oh, I've got a really difficult fold to make here, or I need more leverage. And so the edge of the table helps out a lot.
Yeah. It's funny because, I mean, it seems like the simplest thing, right? You're making a grid. It's super repetitive. But there's a lot of shades of gray and little things you can experiment with, and ways that you can mess it up that you wouldn't even think about, and also ways to improve your speed. So,
and also with the triangle grid, and this may just be anecdotal, but I found it's a lot more forgiving than a square grid. Square grids are just nasty things that if you miss a line, it's like, oh no, that row is sunk.
In terms of collapsing or pre-creasing?
In terms of collapsing, I was trying to fold a water bomb tessellation, and I noticed that one of my rows was too fat and one of them was too thin, and then as trying to collapse that down into like that little popping square, it's like it's not going to happen along that entire row.
That's interesting. I'm not sure if that's a thing or not, but I could actually see that, because with a square grid, if one of your rows is messed up, then at a vertex, half of your creases are going to be in the wrong place. Whereas with a hex grid, if you mess up one, then 2/3 of your creases are going to be right. One of them is going to be wrong. And so it's more likely that the correct creases are going to win over the incorrect ones, you know.
Well,
That would
and
be
that's
my
really
guess.
what it is too, is like you're trying to tell the paper you want to go this way.
Mhm.
And you know, if you got good creases, then it's easy. If you
Yeah.
don't, it's hard, but sometimes it still works.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my guess for what would be going on there. Yeah. And as you mentioned, going back over these videos, for the next two of these where Catherine is teaching them, there's going to be a lot more stuff you can soak up, because this is her whole, like, this is her wheelhouse. She is the expert. I am definitely a tessellations, like I dip my toes in the water from time to time, or I can do them because I can do origami, but she specializes in them. And she really knows what's going on.
I will definitely be there for those next two meetings. They're on my
Yes, pick
calendar.
your brain. That's why we do it.
All right, I managed a arguably very rough 16, and I'm happy with that, and I'm going to walk away feeling accomplished for the night. But thank you so much for hosting this, and I will definitely be around on the 29th.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing you then.
Take care.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. Okay, y'all. Anyone else have any last thoughts or things they'd like to throw out there before we go ahead and shut it down?
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. No, thank you for coming. It's really, really a pleasure to have y'all. Perfect. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and end the meeting, and we'll see y'all, or whoever can make it, we'll see y'all next week. Have a good day. Have a good night.